I'm Mary Buckley, Executive Director with ID Ireland, and I'm in conversation today with Chris Hyams, CEO of Indeed, who is joining us from Austin, Texas. Indeed's mission is to help people get jobs and is a global leader with its online job site platform, connecting people with companies and with recruiters. Indeed has offices in 30 cities and in 16 countries around the world, employing over 10,000 people. When Indeed established in Dublin in 2012, almost 9 years ago now, it had just 3 employees. And today, Dublin is Indeed's international headquarters with a team of over 1,200 people from 19 nationalities across the globe. You're very welcome, Chris, and a very happy and healthy new year to you, your family, and the Indeed team.
Mary, thank you so much for having me, and welcome to everyone who's joining, and Happy New Year to all.
I've been really looking forward to catching up with you, Chris, to discuss culture, diversity, inclusion, and belonging in Indeed. And it's been a while since we met, and a lot has happened, in particular the impact of COVID-19. So it would be remiss of me, Chris, not to open on that, to focus briefly on the significant changes that we're all experiencing in the workplace as a result of the global pandemic, and to hear your views on the future of work and how you see it impacting organisational culture.
Yes, it certainly has been an extraordinary time, and one of the things that we are seeing is that number one, there's very clearly a significant shift towards a more remote workforce. And that was something that was starting before the pandemic. We had heard very clearly from both our own employees, but also we'd been seeing from job seekers that flexibility and work-life balance were really top priorities when they're selecting a company to work for. This obviously has been accelerated due to the pandemic. In our own workforce, we have 90% of our employees, when we've surveyed them, who want to work from home for at least with some frequency into the future. And we have made a decision as a company to really provide that flexibility. We will have less than 1% of our total workforce that will be required to work in an office every day when our offices start to reopen. And while we don't think that the offices or in-person work will ever fully disappear, we do see that many companies will be incorporating a much more flexible working arrangement in the future. Another thing that we've seen is, certainly for our own business, is that video interviewing has become really an essential part of the hiring process. And prior to COVID-19, while some people were conducting a lot of business over video, the vast majority of hiring in the world was done face-to-face. And video interviews on Indeed, if you go back to February and March, less than 1% of all the interview requests sent on Indeed by employers were for an interview over video. Not surprisingly, overnight in April, that shot up by more than 1,000%. And this is something that we see very consistently. Necessity often is a driver of innovation, and people become willing to try new things. And when they try them, they find, for the ones that work for them, that they're things that they want to stick with. And so we expect that virtual interviewing and hiring will really be here to stay for the long term. And especially in a world where there's more remote work, this actually turns out to be a really effective way to start a working relationship with someone. It also turns out to be more efficient for both the job seekers and employers. And it creates a direct human connection back in hiring, especially in these times. The big thing for us when we think about culture, and I know that that's something that's an important part of the conversation we're having here today, is what a remote culture will look like in businesses in the future. And we recognize very clearly that remote is not the same. It also doesn't have to be. Now, we expect to continue to have a vibrant in-office culture, but we believe that people who are working remotely or who are flexible, that will develop its own set of patterns and rituals. They'll be different, and they'll be better suited for a different style of collaboration. And ultimately, being able to support both, we see as a different form of inclusion. It's very clear that there are certain people for whom a vibrant in-person experience is what they crave and what they thrive on. But for other people, we found that there are some folks who really enjoy the quiet and the comfort that they have of being able to work at home. And so now we expect that employers will be able to support different styles of work for different people and really be able to create the best environment for more people.
You have been in leadership roles within Indeed for just over 10 years, and you've been CEO for almost 2 years. And I was keen to understand, how have you brought diversity and inclusion to your own workplace?
This is something that is very important, I think, to every business. It certainly is important to Indeed. I start by saying I think the great news is that it doesn't seem that we are still in a position of debating the value of diversity and inclusion. It was something that maybe 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago, was something that wasn't universally acknowledged. But at this point, it's very clear there's an incredible amount of research that companies that are more diverse have more innovation, they deliver better results, and they have better customer orientation. And so at Indeed, I think like other places, it's been a journey, and really diversity, inclusion, and belonging started at a very grassroots level. We had our own employees who started speaking up, saying that they wanted to be able to create a space that was welcoming and open to more people. And so the employee voices have really been the core of this effort for us. The foundation at Indeed is a series of inclusion resource groups, or IRGs, and those represent various different groups of employees, whether it's women, the LGBTQ plus community, Black employees, Latinx employees. And those inclusion groups exist to create a sense of belonging through community and to drive awareness for all employees and allyship. And this is important, I think, for every business, but really the most important reason for Indeed is our mission. You said at the start, our mission is to help people get jobs. And we recognize that there are bias and barriers in the hiring process. And we really want to use our technology to help reduce that bias and to lower those barriers. And we know that the more our team represents the world around us, the better we are at fulfilling that mission and helping all people get jobs. So we try to ensure that diversity and inclusion and belonging is not just a nice to have. It's not just some random corporate directive. It's really integrated into the business top to bottom. So all of our IRGs have executive sponsors, and those executive sponsors are there to help really be a voice for those IRGs at the most senior levels, to provide support, to open doors. Most of our executives have DI&B goals and OKRs for their organizations in terms of membership and training and service. The most important thing, though, really is what we do outside of our walls, which is the impact that we have on job seekers and employers through our products and through our marketing. And so we've created a product advisory council where we have representatives from all of the various IRGs who are able to meet with our product and marketing teams before we go to market with new ideas, and to provide their input to ensure that we have the most diversity of thought and experience going into our most important decisions. And then we have a real commitment to social impact and to building products that support inclusive hiring. We can have a huge impact on how the world hires and on the diversity and inclusion at every company that's a customer of Indeed. We have customers and clients that are asking us to help them in their own initiatives. We partner with other organizations, like in the US with Goodwill Industries International, where we have a commitment over a 5-year period to help more than 1 million job seekers with barriers find jobs. And we have a real commitment to also looking at our own products from a perspective of algorithmic fairness. We use data to build systems to automate hiring, but that data we know can contain bias. And so we want to build our systems to to help reduce that bias and to lower those barriers. So I think for a lot of organizations, it is more challenging if it's just another thing to think about. How do I run my business and then also worry about inclusion? But for us, it is key that diversity, inclusion, and belonging is really essential to our mission.
And Chris, I'm very conscious as part of that it's a huge part of your key values as well, the whole area of diversity, inclusion and belonging. And you talked about all the things that you're doing within the organisation and outside. But with, offices right around the globe and indeed offices here in Dublin, how do you build on that culture and of belonging and inclusion when your teams are so far apart, both physically and also globally?
One thing about the pandemic is that it is clearly global in impact, and everyone has been touched and impacted by it. At the same time, people are having very different experiences. There are millions of people who are out of work while others are working on the front lines and others are working from home. Some people are home with big families, others are isolated and all alone, and some are taking care of compromised family members while others are trying to work and be school teachers at the same time. So it's both a unifying experience and also one that has its own diversity. Now, our IRGs, our inclusion resource groups, were created to help bring people together, and they have really risen to the occasion. They have been the glue during this experience, and they have been really key as the pandemic unfolded. Different groups, we have an IRG focused on our Asian employees, and they were able to step up early on when in America, especially Asian Americans were experiencing xenophobia because the virus initially had come from China. And there were a lot of people who were going through this experience, and our Asian IRG was able to step up and host a set of safe space conversations to help educate people of what that experience was like. Over the summer after the murder of George Floyd and the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement around the world, our Black Inclusion Group, or BIG, was able to host a series of conversations that not just brought people together in the US, but really around the world to have an open and honest conversation about the state of the world. And what happened is that our inclusion resource groups were really able to grow from what had been very local, each office had their own groups, to being able to connect regionally and eventually globally. And Indeed has always been a distributed business. We started 16 years ago with two co-founders who were 2,500 kilometers apart. And so we've always had a bit of a remote culture, but as we grew, the various locations and the various cultures became a big focus for us around inclusion and belonging. And we've had these different pockets and collections of culture, and the pandemic has really put everyone on a similar footing. We have everyone now showing up as individual squares on a screen. And what we've been able to do and where we've had the most success is to use what I've been referring to as a low-tech, high-touch approach. We have much more frequent and less produced communications. We have weekly all-hands Q&As. We have thousands of people every week who come and ask any question they want. And every single week, I get up there with the chief operating officer and we answer those questions as they come up. You mentioned early on, I've been doing a weekly podcast where I've been sitting down with one Indeed employee every week to talk about their role, their experience coming to Indeed, and what it is that they're doing to help people around the world. And I've also been meeting once a week with a random group of 3 to 5 employees for lunch or breakfast or dinner, whatever the time zone may be, just to connect with a small group of people. And we really feel like we are more connected right now than at any time in the past. I can be present for so many more things than I was able to before when I had to travel around the world. I joined a Diwali celebration and learned some Bollywood dance moves in the UK. I was able to celebrate Black History Month with our team in Amsterdam. And, We've worked at this, but the pandemic has really given us an opportunity to see more of each other and to become closer as an organization.
Particularly, I'm interested in now, really learning a little more as well around the talent and the attraction of talent, etc. And as we tentatively emerge from the crisis, how will companies compete for talent in an era of uncertainty? And what advice would you give to other employers listening to you at our conference today?
Yeah, this is a great question. A crisis, among other things, really exposes and magnifies problems that already exist, and we've seen this throughout the pandemic. When we look at hiring at Indeed, there are a couple of things that are really just the core problems that have been there since we started the business. And for job seekers, the number one issue that we've heard about time and time again is that they apply to dozens and dozens of jobs and never hear back from employers. And we call this the black hole problem. And for employers, the number one problem that they consistently have is that they get too many candidates and many of them are not a match. And so those two issues of black hole and candidate quality have always been there. They've become bigger problems during the pandemic. Employers are now overwhelmed, they're understaffed, they have less time to respond. And that creates more uncertainty for job seekers because they're even less likely to hear back from an employer. And as a result, then job seekers are scared and desperate and they apply to more jobs and maybe even ones that they're not a good fit for. So that creates a harder problem for the employers. So for us, what we've tried to do is really just core to our business is to automate the hiring process and to make it simpler and faster for everyone. So I mentioned briefly video interviewing. We talked to our customers for years and years about the possibility of being able to bring interviews online to Indeed. And we heard very consistently that they felt it was critical to be able to sit across the table from someone and have that conversation. And then in April, people were ready to try something that they had never done before. And, as I said, we increased the number of interviews that were happening online by over 1,000% in 1 month, just in the month of April. But that's actually been sustained. And we built a whole new platform. And it turns out that job seekers and employers both really love this. And many of them are not going to go back. It's simpler, it's faster, and it's better. And for us, because we can manage the whole process, job seekers can apply and immediately schedule an interview or find out right away that they're not a fit and we can recommend another job. And employers can go direct to an interview without having to do the sourcing and screening and scheduling. So the advice really is that this is the best time for employers to try new things. I think we've probably all tried new things over the last 10 months, whether it's ordering grocery delivery to the home or watching first run films at home or playing games with friends and family over Zoom. I know I will be very happy to go back to the grocery store and back to the movie theater and to see friends in person, but I'll also keep doing all of these things. And it's the same with hiring. And so the most important thing is that with all of the uncertainty, trying to really simplify the process and make it easier and faster is more important than it's ever been.
And to try new things, Chris, in culture, it plays a huge role in change, no matter what that degree of change is. So, very briefly, could you provide some top tips to leaders who are evolving their culture in this very much a rapidly changing world currently?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to recognize is just how much people fear change. There's a basic loss of ground when the whole world shifts like it has over the last 10 months. And many people for the first time may be experiencing that kind of groundlessness. So it is really important to provide an anchor. For us at Indeed, our mission of helping people get jobs, our core values, those are the things that are the anchors that are unchanging no matter what's going on in the world around us. And we can't promise that the outside world will stay the same, but we know that some things will be consistent. Helping to identify what those things are and to provide an anchor for people in changing times is really important. And I think the other thing is that, this really is an extraordinary opportunity to see things that we couldn't see before. As I mentioned, crises amplify existing problems, and they shine a light on them. And it's an important time to look at those honestly, and to listen and to be curious, and to try to see how to make your business stronger by understanding those challenges and addressing them. And people fear change. The only thing they might fear more than change is to see that things are fragile or broken. And so looking honestly at those problems is really the only way to make things better. Early on in the pandemic, we saw how hard things were for parents and caregivers. This was not new, but it was really intensified by this experience. And so we had just had an inclusion resource group for parents and caregivers that was formed. And it was just in time, and they were able to advocate for that group and to help us understand what some of those needs were. We created additional flexibility for our employees. We created monthly holidays. We called them U-days. Created additional flexible options for work. And these are things that now are helping all employees, not just the parents and caregivers, and they will be valuable beyond the pandemic. So I would just say be open, curious, and empathetic, and want to look with honesty at what's going on and where things can be improved.
Chris, I think we could continue on this really important topic for a lot longer, but disappointingly, the end is near. So it only leaves me, on behalf of our virtual audience, to thank you so much for taking the time to share some terrific insights with us. Continued success in 2021 to you, Chris, and to the Indeed team. And I hope that you all stay safe and well in these very, very challenging times. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks so much for having me, Mary.
A pleasure, Chris. Thank you for your time.